Just a bit of background for those that don't know me. I have been working for Rapid Solutions for just over 10 years. I'm a solicitor in New South Wales, and I've previously practiced as a solicitor in the United Kingdom. Currently I'm the claims manager, and I've been doing that. I've been in that role since 2012. And in the time I've worked at Rapid Solutions, we've processed over 2,500 claims. What the purpose of this case study is to look at 3 case studies which fundamentally deal with some of the common issues that come up in claims. And each of the case studies has one particular element to it that I would like to bring out. Naturally, with claims, there is more to it than just one aspect, but for the purpose of this case study, I've tried to be fairly focused and directed. So each case study deals with a slightly different point. The first case study comes from a pre-purchase inspection in the ACT. Now, those of you that don't know, the ACT has a different regime to everywhere else, in that there's legislation in place which requires vendors to produce reports and attach them to the contract of sale. But don't be put off by that, because the fundamental inspection that the companies carry out, and the reports that the standard of reporting that applies, is absolutely identical. There are a couple of extra things that need to go in those reports because it's an ACT claim, but effectively, if it's a timber pest inspection, then AS 4349.3 is the applicable standard. And if it's a pre-purchase building inspection, then AS 4349.1 is the applicable standard, which is the same throughout Australia. So this particular claim illustrates the need for awareness of the whole of all of your findings when you're producing a final report. And consideration of reporting is important for the inspector to have at the back of his mind or her mind when they're going around the property. Because consistent reporting is vital to the defence of claims, and where reports are inconsistent, it produces quite difficult hurdles. So if I show you the first photo, that is a real estate agent photo, and it shows what is quite a nice, tranquil, rural property. You won't see it particularly clearly from this photo, but you can see enough, I think. If you look at the actual property itself, and around it, there is a sort of a trellising, and the trellising is attached between the piers, and the piers run all the way around the property. There's no slab on ground at all at this particular place. So it's all raised off the ground, and access to the subfloor is completely restricted by this kind of trellising. Now that's what the pre-purchase inspector faced when he encountered this property, and you just need to bear that in mind as I unpack the different aspects of it. So the next photo, again, just indicative of what was going on. Now this is a hallway. You can see the front door there, and then the door to one of the living areas, and then there's a hallway through to some of the bedrooms and the bathrooms on the right hand side. Now the hallway is of particular interest because you can see roughly around halfway along there is a darkened area. That's mostly shadow from the 2 skylights that you can see, but I draw your attention to that particular area because if you look at it, those floorboards look to be in pretty good condition so far as you can tell from this photo, and there's certainly no obvious deviation in the flooring there, and that's important, as you'll see later on. I'll just give you a couple of examples of photos taken by the inspector at the time of the actual inspection, just to give you an idea of the property. You can see this from this photo of the lounge room that the furniture in place was relatively old and heavy, and that was important because this wasn't just a building inspection claim or a pre-purchase timber pest inspection. It was a claim that involved both. There was a significant amount of termite damage, and there were a couple of significant building issues. And why that was important was one of the telltale signs that our inspector was supposed to have picked up was bounce in the bounce in the flooring. And as you can see from this photo, there's carpet and there's relatively heavy furniture, and that's important because part of what we were saying was that they reduced any potential bounce. And you can see a photo of the kitchen there, and I'm showing you these photos because what you'll see is that there's nothing particularly of interest in these photos for a pre-purchase inspector to look at. Photo of the bedroom with the windows behind, and you can see there's a chair in the middle ground and some cabinets and a desk on the right hand side and a double bed on the left hand side. Now that's particularly important because that was one of the rooms that when we inspected it as part of the claim, there was no furniture in there, and the bounce in that particular room was significant. Now I'll take you to the photo which started the claim. This was the initial complaint that was sent to our insured, and as you can see, that's a fairly obvious issue. The flooring has clearly raised up, and the skirting board has gone with it. In fact, you need no particular speciality or qualification to identify that as a problem with the building. Now that photo was taken in the area where I showed you that original real estate agent photo of the hallway, where there was no deflection, no deviation, and yet here it is after moving into the property. The homeowner's been there a few months now and this has happened. So as they do, he phoned up the person that had done the inspection and said, I have an issue. So when this is our photo, we then went to the site and had a look around. We also took this photo of roughly the same area. Again, there was none of that present in that photo that I showed you of the from the real estate agent photo. But what this does do is it shows that the carpet was not just carpet, but there's in fact ply or some form of boarding put underneath the carpet. And again, that was important because the argument about bounce was a fairly substantial one in the claim. And as you can see, there was mitigating factors which meant that our insured almost certainly didn't encounter. He almost certainly encountered a property that had no bounce. But then we get to the real business of the claim. This is an extract from the report itself. Now the bottom half, as you can see, it's in two tables. The bottom table is irrelevant for this purpose, so I just want you to focus on the top section. And you can see that the top section deals with the administrative elements of the claim of a pre-purchase inspection, and they're pretty much identical for the purpose of this talk in terms of the information. So it doesn't really matter whether it's pre-purchase timber pest or pre-purchase building. They both have the date and time of the inspection, the weather conditions, whether or not the building is occupied, which obviously affects how much access there is to inspect on a visual inspection. Then it goes to the scope. Now the scope deals with what the purchaser can expect the inspector to have done, and what it says is the building and property within 30 metres of the building subject to inspection. So fairly standard stuff that the main building was inspected, as were the surroundings up to 30 metres. And this is a rural property, so there were 30 metres pretty much in all directions from the property. The next box down says the areas inspected were, and it says the building interior, the building exterior, the roof space, the roof exterior, the subfloor and the site. Now that is an interesting section, because really what that says is the building inspector, when arriving at the property, had every intention of inspecting those areas. And so they're acknowledging the contract that would have been signed with the vendor. This is an ACT claim, or if you're everywhere else, normally that would be with the purchaser. And acknowledging the Australian standard that those are the areas that you inspect in a pre-purchase inspection. However, the argument that came back initially was that there was confusion between that, in fact not confusion, contradiction between that and the next line. And as you see, the next line says the areas not inspected for any inspection were, and then quite clearly in the next box it says subfloor area. And the intention there was, if you remember back to that very first photo, that there's trellising all the way around the perimeter of the building. And so there was no bodily access. And I'm being quite deliberate in saying bodily access, and you'll understand why in a moment. But what this report says at this point is the areas not accessible for any inspection were subfloor area. So on the first line it says, sorry, not the first line, the box above it says the areas inspected were, and then it says the subfloor, and then the issue of contradiction comes up that says the area not accessible for any inspection were the subfloor. Now if that had been the whole basis of the claim, I think we would have been fine, because there is always, or nearly always, and there really ought to always be, a section of the report, normally around the signature block, which says if you have any questions or there's anything you don't understand, please contact the inspector, Joe Bloggs on, and then the phone number. And certainly in this report, there was such a section. Unfortunately for the homeowner, they didn't actually phone the inspector at all. But what the homeowner was saying was that that's a complete contradiction, and therefore he hadn't done what he said he was going to do. But of course, quite clearly, if there had been any confusion about that, then he should have contacted the inspector, and he would have been told, no, I didn't actually get into the subfloor at all, and so there wasn't any bodily inspection of the subfloor done. Now the next photo is taken from our claims, and I just put those in to give you an idea of this particular subfloor, and you can see from the left-hand photo that there's fairly clear access. There's a fair bit of foliage apparently removed by the homeowner since moving in, but nevertheless, in terms of height and clearance, there's absolutely no real issue at that section. As you crawl through the subfloor towards the older section, apparently it did narrow significantly, and that becomes important later on. You see from the right-hand photo that there are three types of construction there. You've got the old original timber stumps, and they were the original part of the house. And then you've got brick piers have taken over the structural supporting role, and in the background you can just see some metal posts, which I now know were not actually there to hold up the building. They were there, in fact, in this particular case, to alleviate the issue of bounce in the property. Now this section of the report deals with the subfloor, and you'll remember from the administrative section of the report that the inspector wrote that he intended to inspect all of the areas, including the subfloor, but in fact there was no part of the subfloor that was available for inspection. And then you get, as with lots of reports, you get into the body of the report, and there are different room-by-room sections, or there are different areas that are reported on. And in this case, we come to this section which is entitled subfloor. Now, underneath the subfloor it says piers, and then in that detail box it says original portion of the house on timber stumps, now brick/steel posts, original stumps still in place. This provides a concealed entry point for termites. All of that is absolutely right. You see from that photo from the previous slide that there are in fact brick posts, there are steel posts, and there are timber stumps. And it's quite true, it's quite right to say that timber stumps provide a concealed entry point for termites. The problem, however, wasn't particularly any of that. There was some rumblings from the homeowner about the fact that if he'd known there were timber stumps holding up the house, he wouldn't have bought it and that kind of thing. But really and truly, that wasn't the issue in this case. The issue was that in this particular section, it doesn't say that there was no access to the subfloor as it did in the other section. What it says here is full inspection was limited by, and then it says crawl space. Unfortunately for our defence, that completely changes the nature of what we're able to say about this particular section, because previously there'd been a quite unequivocal statement that there was no part of the subfloor that was available for inspection. But now we get into the body of the report, and the implication from this, that the full inspection was in fact only limited by crawl space, implies, or at least I think it does, that the inspector was actually in the subfloor, and that the only reason he was, he's now saying the only reason that he wasn't able to get full inspection done was because of crawl space. So the question, I guess, is why is that a problem? Why is it now a problem that we've got a contradiction, and why isn't that covered by that referral to the inspector that the homeowner clearly didn't do? I think the problem for us in this instance was that the change came and implied that there had been an inspection. And this is the section of the report where more detail is being given. Now, these reports are also quite long, and in the ACT they have energy efficiency ratings and things. So you're faced with sometimes upwards of 100 pages. And we who deal with these things all the time can quite easily identify these kind of little contradictions. But when you're reading it for the first time, it's a different proposition. But clearly here, with what's said about the piers, it's apparent that there has been an inspection of the subfloor. So how was that possible? Well, in this instance, I had an enormous amount of respect, in fact, for the particular person that completed the inspection, because he was faced with this trellising, and it was true to say that he could not get into the subfloor and therefore wasn't able to gain bodily access to the subfloor. But trellising is not like a brick wall or a gyprock. You can actually see through trellising. So, doing the best that he could with quite a difficult situation, he went to sections of the perimeter. He didn't crawl around the entire perimeter, but he went to sections of it and got on his hands and knees and then shone a torch through, and that's how he was able to identify that there were brick piers, that there were old wooden posts, and that there were steel posts that were in place. He was able to identify from the old hardwood piers that there were hidden access for termites. And all of that is true. Everything that he said in each of these sections is true. But where he's made his mistake, I think, is in the reporting aspect, in that he hasn't connected in his own mind the potential confusion from just reporting these things in isolation answering the questions that he's been faced with at each part of the report. So at the first part of the report, what areas did you intend to inspect? The subfloor, yes, absolutely. What area were you not able to inspect? Well, also the subfloor. But that's not quite the whole story with that. What really should have been said at that point was no bodily access was available to the subfloor. And then here, in this section of the report, he hasn't, I don't think, used quite enough in terms of description language, because what he should have said was, viewed from the outside of the subfloor, I was able to see the original portion of the house on timber stumps, now brick steel posts. And what that would have done was given some level of clarity, some level of explanation to what he was in fact able to do, rather than what the homeowner was faced with, which was this apparent contradiction. Now that caused us enormous problems in the claim, because what we actually came, what everybody agreed with, that went to the site as an expert, including our internal guys, was that had you got any kind of access to the subfloor and crawled through to about halfway through, roughly where that photo was taken, which shows the three different types of structural support, you would have noticed termite leads going up the outside of the of some of the posts. Now it wasn't just one or two leads, there were several really quite established leads. Sadly and unfortunately, they were not capable of detection from the perimeter. So you could have shone a torch all day from the perimeter and looked through the trellising. And then actually what's most reasonable people would agree, I think, a very diligent inspection from the outside, you would not have been able to pick up these termite leads. But had you got into the subfloor, then absolutely, there was no doubt they would have. Now, they were old, dry termite leads too. There was nothing, there was no issue of live activity in the house. There was live activity on the site, but not actually in the house. And so there was no question that they came later. And therefore, what we were up for with the claim was the termite damage, and that ended up being extremely expensive, unfortunately, this particular house. Now, that wasn't the only reason, sorry, but this isn't the only reason that we had liability in the claim, but it was something that I think it's good to be mindful of when you're reporting, that if you make unequivocal statements like there was no access to a particular area, and then you start making comments on things that are inside that area, then you need to explain how that's possible. And if you don't, problems can ensue. So that's the first case study. Now moving on to the second case study. So the second case study is a claim from New South Wales, where a father and son conducted an inspection together. There are views about whether or not it is sensible for two inspectors to do one inspection and to produce one report, and really the jury's out on that, because one inspector can mess up an inspection just as readily as two. But in my view, I think provided they stick to their own particular areas and they talk to each other and they have a good system in place to ensure that the findings from the inspection are reflected in the report, then that's as much as any inspector can do. Now, the instructions for this particular inspection came through the agent, and all of the relevant areas were inspecting, but termite mudding was missed. And because termite mudding was missed, the key recommendation that needs to go into every single report, whether it's a building report or a timber pest report or an annual termite report, if you see termite mudding, you must recommend an invasive inspection by a builder. And why is that? Because the dollar value in claims is always in what the termites have done. There's obviously some cost to killing termites, but generally speaking, that pales into insignificance compared to $200,000 or to repair termite damage. Here's a photo of the subfloor, and you'll see that this particular property has been cut into a slope, and therefore this part of the subfloor is fairly high set. In fact, it's significantly higher than an average man's height. There's a little dwarf wall between some piers just there, and that leads into a cavity area where those stairs also go to. Now, when we arrived for our claims inspection, there was in fact an old bait packet there, not one of the solid rectangular boxes, just an old packet that had held the pellets. We couldn't tell how long that had been there, so that may or may not have been missed by the inspector, but really and truly that didn't affect liability in the claim. It just didn't help matters. But the point of showing this photo is to show that there's really no bodily problems getting into this place. You can walk really freely. Now the next photo is just a slightly different angle from the same area, and you can see there's a piece of equipment in that photo right in the center there that is unusual for a subfloor, and that is a ladder. Now, if you are inspecting in Queensland and you've got high-set Queenslanders, you may not think that's particularly unusual. But in other parts of the country where the subfloors are usually much closer to the ground, an inspector wouldn't necessarily think to take a ladder into the subfloor. And I suspect that was the case here, because there was nothing else in this inspection really to suggest that the son was inexperienced, but in this particular case, had he taken a ladder and inspected the area at the top of that brick wall and below the floor, there is a void. And inside that void, there were, unfortunately for him, fairly obvious termite leads. Now I'm going to show you a photo, the next photo, of that void between the floor and the top of the brick wall. Now, there's a couple of things to say about this. One is that, believe it or not, in that darkened area towards the back, there are in fact termite leads. You simply can't see them in this photo. And so why am I showing you the photo? I'm showing you the photo because I'm a massive fan of photographs. Photographs for me are the most important thing, if not necessarily showing damage or what the problem is. What the photos do brilliantly is show what you can't do as an inspector, why you weren't able to access a particular area, and they visually do so much more than words can do. But this photo shows what the limitations sometimes are of photos, because you've got a flash in this particular shot, and what that does is show all the nice cobwebs in the foreground, and you can't see the termite leads in the background. However, if you use a mag light and you shine your mag light in, you can see right to the end of that section very, very clearly. And anyway, just make the point about photos that whilst they are fantastic and they are essential to all reports, and as I say regularly to anyone who will listen, if you're not using photos in your reports, start using them. Because they are an essential tool. They're not perfect, as can be seen from this shot. So, as you can see, I think photos are an essential part of any reporting system. And if you look at the three photos that I'm showing here, you get a good overview of this claim. So the top photo, just to recap, shows you there's very good access to this particular subfloor. The second photo shows that there is sometimes, even in subfloors, the need to use surprise equipment. And the third photo shows what the area that would have been capable of being inspected. So what's the point of this case study? The point of the case study is really to highlight the need for awareness in any inspection that a particular person is undertaking, to be alert to the building that they're inspecting. And the inspection is governed in part by the systems that each inspector will have been trained in and will have developed over the years. Most inspectors that I've spoken to about this will tell me that they have a particular methodology of going round a building, and that is to ensure that they don't miss anything. So some go left to right, some go right to left, some will do the roof void first, some will do it last. It doesn't matter particularly, so far as I'm concerned, in what order you do it, but you need to ensure that you have a system. However, that system is not necessarily everything, and there will be times, as in this particular inspection, where you need to do something slightly different. And the particular inspector in this case, I think through lack of experience, didn't consider a ladder, and therefore simply didn't get to do the inspection that he should have done. And we believe, had he done so, would have discovered the termite damage, or at least the leads, and had he done that, the inspection report would have included the recommendation to get an invasive inspection by a builder, and therefore the problem that was tens of thousands of dollars of termite damage would have been capable of detection prior to the purchase of the property, or rather prior to the exchange of contracts or the end of the cooling off period. So therefore it's important to bear in mind your surroundings and to be looking for unusual things in any type of inspection. So the third case study in this little sequence of about inspections relates to a fairly common problem that we encounter. And in this particular inspection, it was a pre-purchase timber pest inspection, and there were termites in the roof void, and we believe they were certainly there in the roof void at the date and time of the original inspection. The later invasive inspection that was undertaken as part of the claim found that there were termites throughout the house, and so it was a very expensive claim and a really avoidable one in our view. And the issue that came up in it is a very, very common one, and that relates to what is capable of inspection in an area where an inspector encounters access restrictions or limitations. So to get an idea of what we're talking about, you can see from the photo that there's a landing there, and the access to the roof void is somewhat unusual in that it's in the wall space, but there's no particular problems climbing into that, getting into that. An inspector would probably need a step ladder, but other than that, there's no massive issue. When the inspector opens up the access point and looks inside, what the particular person was encountered was this. And as you can see, there are stored items in the immediate foreground, and there's some ducting in air conditioning in the back, and just that sort of yellow tubing, and then you can see there's the fairly normal construction limitations. And then you can see from this particular photo, which is a slightly different angle, that there's also insulation, and the insulation goes above the ceiling timbers and obviously has an impact on what is capable of being inspected in a timber pest inspection. Whilst I say this was a timber pest inspection, it was a combined report with a building report, but the particular complaint was against the timber pest aspect of it. And the point that I'm making is not unique to building inspections or timber pest inspections. It is something that comes up with all types of inspection. So this slide shows, or the next slide shows, what the report actually said. I'm not going to read it out, but you can see from the screen that it is a fairly detailed and fairly typical explanation about access restrictions in a roof void. And it makes the quite sensible and fair warning, or gives the sensible and fair warning that defects or damage may be present and not detected in areas where the inspection was limited, obstruction or access was not gained. And again, that's repeated in the next paragraph under inspection restrictions. So why is that a problem? I think it's a problem in this particular case because that was the sum total of the inspection. The inspector, had they simply stepped inside the roof void area and looked around, would have, we believe, identified these things. Now you can see there's some blue cord, blue electrical wiring, and that is the same wiring that appears 3 slides earlier, and you can see that that's just viewed in this new photo from a different angle, and it is quite apparent that there is termite mudding on that in the middle of that piece of timber. Similarly, where you've got other in the other 2 photos, just by the sarking, in the middle photo you can see some termite damage, and then between the timbers in the 3rd photo. Now, it's perfectly possible that termites can do that level of termite mudding in a matter of days, and so how could we know beyond doubt, or on the balance of probabilities, which is the legal standard, that mudding existed at the date and time of the original inspection? Unfortunately for the inspector in this case, the standard gap between exchange of or the contract being crystallised at the end of the cooling off period and the settlement date was not the normal 6 weeks, which it tends to be in New South Wales. It was a shorter period of about 4 weeks. And the first complaints about termites came in only a couple of days after the completion date. So in reality, there was 4.5 to 5 weeks between the inspection and report being delivered and the people moving in and discovering the termites. Now, as I said earlier, the particular termite damage here was throughout the house, as we found out on the invasive inspection. And I think if you step back and think about it for a moment, if you're in front of a judge or a tribunal member and your argument is that there may well be a massive amount of termite damage, but the only evidence of it is this bit of termite mudding in these photos, and we believe that it's possible that that termite mudding may not have existed 4.5 weeks earlier, then the fairly neutral tribunal member or judge is going to take some considerable convincing that that is in fact the case. Because it's simply, it might be perfectly right that it's possible that the termite damage only that wasn't visible, but because photos weren't taken, I should say that these photos of the termite mudding were taken in the claim rather than being the inspector's photos, because that's a different type of negligence if you photograph something and then to fail to report it. These claims photos, we simply don't do very well in court or tribunals when we're faced with that particular argument. We need to be all but certain that, and be able to prove that it's all but certain that the termite mudding wasn't present. But I do accept the point that the mudding in the particular photos may only have taken a very short period of time to come in. So what was the problem? The problem with the inspector was, as I said, had he stepped inside the roof void and just done a little bit of inspecting and tapping around the timbers that were accessible, then we believe he would have identified this particular damage or termite mudding. And that's a common thing because, you know, just about every inspector will be faced with roof voids that have water coolers or air conditioning systems or stored items that prevent them from getting very far into the roof. But that does not mean there is nothing that they can inspect. As I say, my suspicion from looking at these claims and seeing this issue come up again and again, I suspect that the inspector is doing the right thing. They're looking at what it is that's blocking the inspection, what it is that's stopping them from doing the full inspection or the normal inspection of this particular area. And as in the case in this particular one, some of the descriptions of access restrictions are really quite good. And unfortunately, that doesn't get you out of jail for the areas that are capable of inspection, and there's almost always something, even if it's you can only get your arm in to the roof void and tap around those timbers, there is still an expectation that you will do at least that. And it is more common than it ought to, than you would think, for termite damage to be discoverable within arm's length of the roof void if you tap the timbers. There may or may not be muddy to see, but certainly if you tap the timbers around, we have got a number of claims that would have been avoided had the inspector done that, notwithstanding the fact that they did report access restrictions. So to sum up the three case studies, case study 1 was from the ACT, as I said, and that's it's really important to be clear about what areas you can and cannot inspect. And if you say you can't inspect an area, but do make comments about that area, then that needs to be clear how it was possible for you to do that. So if you recall in that one, what I was talking about was trying to locate the inspector on the outside. So describing the subfloor as having no bodily access. And then when he was reporting on the subfloor piers, that viewed from the outside, I could see, and then describing the piers and that kind of thing. And where he was talking about the access limited to crawl space, it would be once access is gained, it will still be limited by crawl space. So all of the information was right in the report, but it didn't fit together because there simply weren't enough words to explain what was going on. So the second case study, that was the one where you had the two inspectors, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that they followed their normal routine. They followed the normal access, the normal inspection process that they would follow, but didn't consider that they might need the unusual piece of equipment, which in that particular case was a ladder inside the subfloor. And had they done that, we believe would have identified the termite mudding that was in the void between the piers and the bottom of the floor. The third case study, again, it's important to remember that whilst an area may be limited or access may be restricted, that there is almost always, unless you're facing a locked door, something that can be inspected, and you must inspect what you can, because limitations and restrictions do not mean no inspection. That's it. Thanks for listening.